Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Intimacy is critical in a healthy marriage, and too many people think that that just means physical intimacy. But to really connect in the bedroom, a certain level of emotional intimacy is necessary. And this is especially true for women. And if you're a frequent listener to the show, you know that I refer to sex between men and women as the cosmic joke. Men have access to the bonding hormone oxytocin through physical connection. And women need to feel emotionally connected to their partners to really open up physically. So ideally, there's enough goodwill in the marriage for each partner to be willing to bridge that gap. But since sex is one of the two topics that creates the most tension and arguments in a marriage, I'm guessing that that's not always the case. Now, considering how little men and women really know about how the other one works sexually, I'm really not at all surprised. So to take a closer look at this important but often contentious aspect of marriage, I'm joined by Andrew Bauman. He is a licensed mental health counselor, and he is the co-founder and director of the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. And boy, that's a mouthful. But Andrew, thank you for being on the show and talking about this difficult but necessary topic.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I truly believe who we are sexually is a reflection of who we are in the rest of our lives. And so we really have to explore our sexuality. What's your story with your sexuality? What do you bring into your marriage? What did your parents teach you about sexuality? What did your church teach you about sexuality? And if we can begin to kind of unwind, to me, that helps grow that intimacy and connection. And you can have a much cleaner engagement with your partner rather than all the noise.
Well, I mean, and it's so interesting that you say that, because we are bombarded with contradictory messages. Yes. I mean, you know, sex is used to sell everything, but we don't actually really talk about sex.
Right.
And I mean, other than getting past the actual physical components of this goes here. I mean, it's like, because sex is obviously, we need sex to keep the species going. But people, and a lot of animals are designed to only have, they only have sex when they are trying to procreate. And humans are not built that way. Sex is pleasurable for most of us. And so, but there's so much misinformation out there that no wonder it creates a challenge.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I think of my own upbringing, growing up in the South in a Southern Baptist church, and it was the True Love Waits movement. It was all shame based. There was no actual talk about sexuality except bad, right? Don't do that. But there was
except
no
when you get married, and then it's supposed to be fantastic. It's like, okay, so
Exactly. So it was just insane. And then what you describe as far as marketing, as far as like, you see that the objectification of women have been selling products, for generations. And this other, so we have this shame-based sexuality, and then the other extreme, you have this shamelessness. And neither are talking about healthy sexuality. How do we honor and not devour beauty? How do we share rather than to be selfish? How do we, and so that is the work of a healthy sexuality.
Okay, which is really what I wanted to talk about today. So, one of the things that I know, that a lot of people think of intimacy, they connect intimacy with sex, and of course intimacy is so much more than that. To have a truly intimate relationship with our partners requires just more than, fireworks in the bedroom or the dining room, wherever you happen to want to have them.
Yes.
But so what makes sex and physical intimacy so important in a marriage?
Yeah, physical intimacy, it's about connection. And we connect in multiple different ways, right? We connect intellectually, we connect sexually, we connect emotionally, we connect spiritually. And it's so vital for healthy intimacy to have a balanced approach upon all those areas of connection. So if all you're doing is thinking about sex and making sex an idol, then you're missing out on the intellectual connection, on the spiritual connection, on these other forms of connection. And so I think the healthiest relationships have a balanced approach to intimacy where we're connecting on multiple different levels. It can't just be about sex, and it can't just not be about sex. Like, sex is a beautiful part. Sex is a beautiful part of what makes us intimate and connected.
Okay, so you talked about something called healthy sexuality. So but for many people, they would think that, okay, that's an oxymoron. I mean, what does that mean? What does it mean to be healthy, sexually healthy as an individual, and then how does that translate to being in a relationship?
Right. Well, do you have like 2 or 3 hours to discuss it?
That question is sort of like a question that I had when I was in 10th grade English. Is the final exam was tell everything you know about English literature, brief but be specific. It's like, okay, so this is kind of like that same kind of question.
Exactly. Well, we can just talk about a few of the categories. We might not be able to touch all of them, but I think of unhealthy being emotionally distant versus being emotionally present. Right? Does your partner have your face during sex? Do you engage eye contact? Are you sharing your heart, your vulnerabilities, your shame, your heartache, your heart? Like, that is what it means to be emotionally present versus emotionally distant. And so that's one of the foundations of a healthy sexuality. Will you be emotionally present? Another category, are you authentic and true versus secrets? Do you have a hidden life? I remember from my own story being addicted to pornography for over 13 years, having this secret life and yet also being a pastor. I lived this split identity, and therefore I could not be emotionally connected with a partner. I could not be, I could not offer my future wife at the time, it was my girlfriend at the time, I could not offer my full heart if I was still addicted and had a secret life. I had to integrate my personhood to be the same guy in every arena. I had to become authentic to be sexually healthy.
Okay. That sounds tremendously scary.
Yes, definitely. And yet it fits with another category of like, we got to live in reality, because pornography, these other things that get into our mind, is fantasy-based, right? It's not based in real world. Relationships are hard. Sex is messy. Feelings are hard. And yet pornography taught so many of us that this idea, this fantasy-driven idea of sexuality, that's not based in reality. It's just not real. And so we got to get out of our fantasies about sex, and actually you get to share it with your partner, and you get to learn together. You get to grow together. You get to say, this is pleasurable. This is not. I enjoy this. I don't enjoy this. And you get to build that bond together.
Well, and that's an interesting thing that you talk about, because, I'm old enough to remember that pornography was brown paper over the cover of certain magazines, and maybe once video stores came, there used to be the shops in that part of town that you would go to, or video stores were in. There was the back section of the videos, and and now you don't even have to leave the confines of your own home. It's so prevalent. And
in all of our phones, right? We have within instants, within seconds. If I chose right now, I could get pornography right now on the very phone that I'm talking to you on. And so it's an epidemic. Barna did a study called the porn phenomenon, that it said over 50% of pastors, 50% have some type of relationship with porn, 60% of youth pastors, and 70% of Christian men.
Right.
So, I mean, this is an epidemic, and this affects our mindset and creates a pornographic mindset. I call it in my book, Psychology of Porn, a pornographic style of relating. We begin to relate to the world pornographically because so many times porn becomes our mentor of what sexuality is, and we have to undo so much of that.
Right, and because we don't necessarily have an alternative, because I know you said something about what do we learn about sex from our parents? And I still laugh because when my children were younger, they thought their father and I had sex 3 times. It's like, okay, I mean, and you definitely do not necessarily want to be talking to your parents about what they're doing behind closed doors because that's just so gross. Because your parents aren't really people; they're just,
right.
But it's funny, not funny when there are videos like I'm talking YouTube videos, not where women are explaining to their boyfriends, about the monthly cycle and and it's like just a complete lack of information about
it's heartbreaking.
How bodies work,
and
just
it's heartbreaking.
And and then you've got this other source of information, which is first off, based on people are being paid to do this, right?
Right.
And what's becoming normalized is it's like, well, because I saw it in pornography, and it's also very. One, it's instant gratification. 2, I don't have to have any relationship because this person doesn't actually exist. They're a fantasy, but we don't have anything on the other side to really talk about not just a physical act, because that is that is in and of itself, but what it means on a different level, and and what does it mean to look into each other's eyes? I mean, first off, that's scary across the dinner table.
Right.
And this idea that I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to be open to this other person, and they can see deep into me, which of course is people talk about intimacy, into me, you see. This whole thing is, it's like, oh my God, again, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Yes, it's terrifying, and yet that's what we all long for, right? A huge reason that people flock to pornography is because of lack of connection. They're longing for connection, and yet they don't know how to attain it, right? They don't know how to get it. They're terrified of genuine intimacy. So the false intimacy becomes more appealing because it's easy. There's no risk. It's cheap. But we're all longing for genuine intimacy and connection.
Right. And pornography never says no. You are never rejected.
Right. Exactly.
It's never, and just understanding. I mean, and I think that there are so many people that forget understanding how the other gender works. We don't even necessarily understand how our own body works and how to uncover. I mean, obviously we know if something hurts, right? I mean,
sure, of course.
But we don't always know what feels good, or and then of course you were talking earlier about the shame factor, and there's so much shame around this. Little kids. Young kids who figure out that shimmying up a tree feels really good. They don't know why.
Of course,
they just know that it does, right?
Right, and that's why so much of us, and I feel such a passion to help teach parents, church leaders. We have to normalize sexuality. We have to normalize our bodies. We have to normalize. We have to talk about it. We just have to talk about it often.
People are just going to want to do it.
Right. And yet that is such, I think, such a false narrative.
Right.
We are meant for pleasure. God created us for pleasure and goodness. We are meant for it. So how do we actually talk about it in a healthy way? Sex is not bad. So much of this sex negative approach has not been helpful and not prepared our kids for the sexuality that they will encounter in the world.
Right. So I just want to remind people that this is Happily Ever After. It's just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm having a really important conversation about sex, intimacy, and marriage with licensed mental health counselor Andrew Bauman. And if sex and intimacy are challenges in your marriage, please know that you're not alone. As I said before, it's one of the two biggest sources of disagreement in a marriage. Add to that the evidence that more and more marriages are starting to be classified as sexless. It is a real problem. But there really are solutions, and if you want to know more, I invite you to get in touch with me today to learn how to move past or to get a healthier relationship, not just with your partner, but with sex. So you can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. And I want to get back to this conversation with Andrew. And so one of the ideas that you talk about, you know, if you go to your website, you actually see this. You talk about the sexually healthy man. So can you define what this means and why this would be a desired goal?
Yeah. Well, so much of what we've been talking about fits with the same idea. So many of us men have learned how to objectify rather than to honor beauty. And the world, pornography, all these other messages that have come in, we have not learned how to engage beauty in a healthy way without trying to devour it, to have master over it, to basically take out our wounds. We feel better about ourselves if a woman affirms us, or, we basically do not know how to engage in a healthy way. And so part of what it means to be a sexually healthy man is to begin to really self-reflect and dive into your own wounding, to your own issues with beauty, your own issues with your own sexuality. Will you have the courage to tell the truth about yourself and your sexuality?
Well, how does somebody know what the truth is? I mean,
so it's telling the story, right? It's beginning to tell the story. For me, beginning to find pornography as a young teen, around 12, 13 years old, early adolescence, internet becomes a thing. And I realize my parents aren't talking about it. They're going through a divorce, separation, divorce. Nobody's talking to us about anything. And I can't even ask questions because I know it's not appropriate. Even though it was never said explicitly, we didn't talk about sex. So I knew I didn't want to make my parents feel uncomfortable. So we just put everything under the rug, just shoved it. So then I find pornography and it begins to soothe my anxiety. It begins to comfort me in a way that, at first was just curiosity, but then slowly it becomes a prison. Slowly it begins to damage my brain. And then I begin to no longer have I can't even have a real relationship. In college, I begin to jump from, woman to woman to woman. Like, I don't know how to have real relationship. And now I begin to expose myself as I'm becoming an adult. I still relate like a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And beginning to realize that, it begins to break me. So much so that I 15 years ago, ended up in the psychiatric ward. Like, I lost everything. This is why this is so important to me, is because this broken sexuality literally broke me, and I had to rebuild and create something new, and I know others need that as well.
Well, I mean, because, we tend to do this in general. And I think that, in sexuality, especially as young people, when we're not really exposed to what it is to be in a relationship, what it is. I mean, because, my story is not quite exactly as yours, but, my parents went through a divorce. I felt very lost. I was looking for love. Right?
Yes.
I wanted to be loved, and sex was part of that. And,
yes.
And we have a lot of, kids, young people today who, are involved sexually without fully understanding why. Is there an understanding of what's being sought out? So it's like for you,
exactly.
pornography.
Right.
Pornography soothed you. For other people doing this other thing is where they, as opposed to going deeper into, here's this wound, here's this, I want to, I always, quote Garth Brooks, I was looking for love in all the wrong places.
Right.
And ended up, I found myself in an emotionally abusive relationship because I was so desperate to be loved.
Right.
And sex plays a role in that because it does, right? Because we're sexual creatures. It feels good, most of the time.
And we so many times we sexualize our pain in an effort to make sense of our pain. Mm-hmm. We sexualize our pain, and that's why with all the clients that I work with. Okay, what type of porn are you looking at? What type of, fantasies, sexual fantasies do you have? And we explore all these things rather than being judgmental. We do it out of curiosity because it is a map to their brokenness. And we heal the brokenness, we heal the pain, then the acting out behaviors, the sexual behaviors begin to go away.
So that kind of leads straight into this other question that I want to ask, because it's, talking about what are some things a couple together or one partner on their own can do to move towards a healthier, sexuality and deeper intimacy with their partners. And so what I'm hearing from you is that it starts, like just about anything else relationship oriented, with ourselves and doing a deeper dive into what's, into what's driving our behavior, because, human beings, I tell my clients, human beings are not irrational. Whatever it is they are doing, there is a reason for it. And when we uncover the reason, then we can explore other behaviors that are healthier for us. But there's I don't want to call it a resistance, because that implies that people don't want to do this. But it's such a hard thing to do. So what are some first steps to do this deeper dive into ourselves?
Right. Obviously, I'm a believer in counseling. Find a good stage. Find someone ahead of you on the journey. And there's a lot of bad counselors out there. There's a lot of bad, information. I'd also say good books. My new book, The Sexually Healthy Man, came out this year. It's a great book. And then also The Great Sex Rescue is a new book that studied 20,000 women and a bunch of books that are on marriage and just how toxic they really are. We have to really begin to dive into good material and really retrain ourselves on what healthy sexuality is.
Well, and I think the first part is just an acceptance that sexuality in and of, there's nothing wrong with sexuality in and of itself. It's part of our makeup. And I have a good friend who's an intimacy coach, and she goes into the physiology of, here's what the body parts are, here's how they work. We're designed. We wouldn't be designed this way, right? But we don't. But then we go, well, I was shamed when I was a child, or whatever our story is, or nobody talked about sex, or I have we got the information on the street from our friends, which is okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And the deeper, I mean, you talked about this earlier, like the deeper we cannot go somewhere with a partner if we have not gone there ourselves. And so if you feel like, you are shallow in your engagement and you don't have a lot of close friends, and this is where, and I work with so many men who feel this way. It's like, we've got to dive deeper into how our own story so that we can connect more deeply with our partners.
And the idea is, and I so agree with you, that we need to have these support systems, but that's also part of the problem. I mean, we talk about what's available on our phone and forget the pornography, just the whole social media that we live and die by the likes on our Facebook page.
Right.
And we have friends, which that's, I would call acquaintances, not friends, but we don't have these places where we have these connections and conversations past the superficial, whether, where it's not the 20-year-old guys comparing their conquests or the girl, or the, I mean, it's actually finding somebody that you can have these conversations with,
Right.
Because I get a lot of times my clients going, well, is our sex life normal? And it's like, okay, define normal. I don't even know what that word means. Are you guys okay with it? If you guys are, then that's whatever. If one of you's not okay with it, then let's take a look at what that is about.
Right. And so I would encourage people, who are listening, like, vulnerability is contagious. If you want a vulnerable group of friends, will you start with yourself? Will you start being vulnerable? And in some people that will attract, some people that will push away and repel. And it's like, for me, where I'm at, it's like I'm so tired of pretense. I'm so tired of that. It's just like I'm just going to be me, and then see who is drawn to that. And then see who I'm drawn to. And that's where natural relationships can happen, and natural vulnerable relationships can happen.
And it really is taking off the mask.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even know what masks we're wearing. Because I have lots of clients. It's like, well, I don't want to upset my partner. It's like, and I always ask them, is your intention to upset them?
Right.
No. Okay. Then if you're being honest with them and they get disappointed or whatever, I said that's not a reason not to be honest, right? Because you're holding on to things and you're playing a role that doesn't fit. And then you get later on in life, and, this is when a lot of relationships get blown up, is because somebody has been pretending. And I don't mean consciously pretending, because most people don't know that they're doing it. They just know that they're desperately unhappy.
Exactly.
And then they think blowing up the relationship is the way to be happy. And it's like, that is, sometimes that'll work, but usually, I tell people there's a lot of steps that you can try before actually blowing up a relationship. But part of that is actually learning how to talk to yourself and how to talk to other people, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the average couple, I think they wait 7 or 8 years before they go get help through marriage counseling.
I know.
And it's like, hey, we got to deal with, anything that you fear, any of the landmines, let's actually walk right towards them. And that's what we encourage all of the couples that we work with. Let's go right to the landmines. But you're going to need some help, because there's so many triggers. There's so much potential for harm, disaster. And you got to have wisdom navigating these difficult places.
Right, and that's and that's the challenge, is because a lot of times people will try to do it by themselves, and they'll step on one of those landmines, and then they don't know what to do, And and again, you're right. That's where all the information is, and that's where people go, I'm not going there, because that's just that's
yes,
what
right. Right.
So,
and through my my own kind of spiritual lens, another way to say it is we have to go through crucifixion to taste resurrection. We have to go through death to taste new life. And so you have to step into these hard places if you want to taste the goodness and the intimacy that we were designed for.
And I think that's, you and I could talk about this for a long time, but I think that's a perfect place to stop. So would you please share your information about your book, about your website, where people can learn more about how to become more sexually healthy?
Yeah, so you can check out, I've written five different books. You can check those out. My wife, as well as a therapist and author. You can check us out at christiancc.org, or my personal website is andrewjbauman.com, and write a lot of blogs on there. And follow me on social media as well. Yeah,
can you spell your last name?
Yeah, Bauman.
Okay, great. So what I want people to know is that, the actual act of intercourse seems fairly straightforward, but real intimacy is so much more than that. In addition, there are more moving parts to a good sex life than most people are aware of. But in this, like most things, as we've been talking about today, knowledge is power. So hopefully you are more knowledgeable now than you were an hour or half an hour ago. And so I have two questions. What more do you need to know, and how will you use it? And so hopefully one of the things you'll do is to keep listening to this show. And until next week, stay loving.